Getting laid off can be really, really scary. And it's often like completely unexpected. So, without another job lined up, what are some of the most critical things you need to think about when it comes to your finances? Aravind Sithamparapillai is an associate at Ironwood Wealth Management Group. He wrote a piece on this topic for the Globe and Mail. We're going to talk more about that. The things you need to be thinking about when it comes to managing a layoff. He's in Fonthill, Ontario. Hello there.
Good to see you, Bruce. It's been a while.
This isn't circumstance you're going to be in anytime soon, I hope, but the boss books a meeting. HR attends the meeting. They deliver the news. It's crushing news. When it comes to your money, what is like the very first thing an individual should do?
So if you're gonna ask me tongue in cheek, I would say that they should probably rewind the clock about a month and book a meeting with their employment lawyer.
Oh,
And and we'll talk about that in a sec. Because I really do think that everyone sort of underestimates the value of having those types of conversations in advance. But if you're in the moment, the first thing I would say is don't sign anything because most of those contracts that they give you still have a time period on them. And so take it and just take some time that day, let it sink in, go home. And if you have an employment lawyer or you have a financial planner, you should be reaching out to them and discussing it. And the
and
only
getting a
thing
second set of eyes.
Exactly. And the only thing I would say is sometimes people are a little hesitant. So if you are in that meeting with HR, it's okay to ask. I have trusted advisors that, like a legal advisor or a financial advisor. I presume I'm allowed to share this with them because they will usually have some type of, legal wording that says you cannot share this with anybody. So clarify that in advance so that even though the clock is ticking, you kind of have one or two people that you can start to reach out to for assistance.
What are some of the variables that would be in play and maybe even on that piece of paper?
So the first, and this is why I say tongue in cheek, going back in time and chatting with an employment lawyer is super important, is tenure. Because there is a bare minimum. So there is the Employment Standards Act in Ontario that kind of governs what the bare minimum if you are being fired without cause or let go essentially without you having done anything wrong. There are some basic minimums that are in play. Now, for smaller companies, it's 1 week for every year that you've been employed at the company. And for larger companies and with a certain amount of tenure, that can double to 2 weeks every year. But every lawyer will tell you that's like previously existing contract law. That is the bare minimum. If there are existential circumstances, like you've been at this company for 30 years, so transition will be difficult, or maybe you have a very technical, highly specialized job that will make it very difficult to find a new role very quickly. All of those things can become factors for pushing out what you might be entitled to. I normally say to people, if you really understood and you stopped and kind of did the math on your salary, your bonus, your benefits, any RSP contributions or matching, like those all are part of your total compensation. And if you really stop to think about how many dollars are at play, it makes having a conversation with an
Mm.
employment lawyer and getting some of these thoughts down on paper, it seems like a very, very small cost to pay before that clock starts ticking on that 48 or 72-hour period.
What are some of the tax implications that could be relevant to people in terms of what that package looks like?
So, in general, these packages are going to be taxable because it's essentially replacement income for time to carry you between not having the job to finding your new job. And so think of it as replacement income and it's taxed as income. And so one of the big, sorry, apologies there, Bruce, but one of the big considerations that the company will typically give you is, do you want a lump sum? So all your money all up front at once, or do you want something called a salary continuance? And so a salary continuance essentially will treat it like you are quote unquote still employed at the company. You
Mm.
get your paycheck however regularly. You will often have your benefits continue. You may even have some of your other ancillary pieces like equity compensation or RSP matches still in play. And one of the big things that I really try to hone in on with people is the wording and the timing really matters. The reason is oftentimes the lump sum may have some type of provision, like you will only get 50% of that compensation upfront. The salary continuance, on the other hand, might say that when you get a job, you have to notify us and then we will stop paying you because, again, continuance was meant to carry you until you got a new job. And so those alone create a little bit of a trade-off. Do I want money up front? Do I want the uncertainty?
Mm.
But let's say you work a six-figure job, and now you've earned about $100,000 coming into November, December.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you get laid off and they say, do you want your money all at once or do you want it as a salary continuance throughout? Well, adding, let's say you're entitled to another 30 or 40,000, adding that on top of $100,000, it, all of that money is getting taxed at a very different bracket than a
Right.
salary continuance when the clock starts over in January and you're starting with $0 of income. And so the
Right.
timing is where that becomes a really important consideration as well.
A big part of people's total compensation plan often includes benefits. What insight do you have on how to make the most of that part of the equation?
So I can say that not all benefits have the same timing associated with them. And what I mean by that is sometimes there are certain components, like maybe a healthcare spending account or certain other ancillary pieces that may have an actual different timing relative to, health benefits, dental, pharmaceuticals, that kind of thing. And so first is understanding which benefits are starting and stopping when. The second is if you have benefits with some sort of discretion behind them. And what I mean by that is often people need to go see an eye doctor, or people maybe delayed getting that dental appointment because their schedule was too busy, things like that. You don't want to be in a situation where the clock is running out on you and you are now struggling to kind of book those things. So again, once you know how long you have, it might be time to revisit all of these family health pieces that you've maybe been delaying
Mm.
and start to line up some of those appointments. And third, important, but perhaps doesn't always come to people's mind, is the life insurance and disability insurance component. Because often many workplaces that are generous enough to have a benefits package will also have some type of life and or disability insurance. And sometimes, not always, this one requires a little bit more handholding and a little bit more work. But many of the insurance providers will allow you to essentially convert some of that employer insurance into your own personal insurance with a much less rigorous medical questionnaire or fluids or blood, as an example,
Right.
which can be helpful if you are older or maybe you do have some health conditions. And so, again, I would say that's not necessarily a catch-all or requires some hand-holding, but there's a lot of prep that you can at least do to know what your options are at that point.
So you've signed off on the agreement, you consulted the lawyer, you got the best you can, and here you are with a cash flow reality that might be quite different from prior to the layoff. Maybe not for a couple of months, but maybe 3 or 4 months or 6 months down the road.
Mhm.
It's a different reality. What are some things that people need to think through, plan for, and make decisions about such that they can live sustainably with the bills that are unavoidable, like a mortgage or rent?
I love it. So first is, have they done a budget? And so in an ideal world, you might have a budget in general of what you typically spend. So everyone kind of knows, hey, I've got a mortgage, I've got a car payment, we go out for dinner every now and then, groceries cost this. And so first of all, do you have a budget? And if you do, have you broken it into like true have to pay these bills, they cannot go by, and things that we might consider a little bit more discretionary? And can we stack rank them to say which are the important things that we're covering as absolute critical must-haves, which are wants, but still fairly high on the priority list? Like there might be kids' activities or something like that that you don't want to interrupt their life or create this sense of shock for the entire family.
Right.
And so how do we go through that? Once you know how much per month, that's where you can work with your advisor or your planner to say, okay, if we know we need this much a month, and then we have a certain amount coming from, say, our paycheck or our salary continuance, how long will that last us? And then do we have any other residual savings? So this is where I might look at things like a non-registered account. Maybe there are like restricted stock units that are up for sale, or equity that you've invested in your company that you have to realize anyways.
Just one last question before we go. There are probably some savings vehicles that people have like on an automatic withdrawal, like a TFSA or a first home savings account or an RRSP. Do you recommend people pause them for the duration, or can you only answer that after they've done their own budget?
No, I would say, especially for FHSA and RRSP, I think it's worth pausing for two reasons. One is they're a little bit more restrictive. Like you can still take it out, but you don't get that room back or anything like that. So, you potentially have damage that you can't undo if you realize you need those funds that you contributed in. And the second piece is taxation, right? If you're starting a new year, you don't have the same amount of income, that RSP or FHSA contribution isn't as valuable to you
Right.
anyways. So you can always make up for it later, but in absence of having that conversation, I think pausing makes a lot of sense. TFSA,
Mhm.
because you can take it out, slightly less of an impact. And the only piece that I want to warn people about, which many are not aware of, is EI will only
Mhm.
kick in after the salary continuance ends. And so many
Right.
people are shocked sometimes when they go to file for EI, and maybe they have, let's say, 6 months of that continuance. And then they say, well, what do you mean EI is only going to pay me in 6 months? And EI will tell you it's because your employer is
Right.
technically paying you. So I want to remind
Right.
everybody that EI kicks in after the fact.
Arvind, thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure, Bruce.
Aravind Sithamparapillai is an associate at Ironwood Wealth Management, and he was here to talk about the things you need to think about if you were in the circumstance where you lose your job.